Hello, friend. Come sit with me for a while, because tonight's story is about a gift that almost got thrown away before anyone understood what it actually was. Have you ever had something rare inside you? Something other people could see clearly before you ever trusted it yourself? Tonight we are going to follow a boy who carried exactly that kind of gift, through poverty, through ridicule, through a period so difficult that half of Europe had quietly written him off as a cautionary tale. And then, almost impossibly, we will watch that same boy stand on a stage in Paris in his early 20s, holding football's most coveted individual prize. Stay with me until the end, because the real turning point of this story is not the trophy. It is a decision made quietly, on an ordinary evening, by a woman who had never watched a football match in her life. This is the story of Ousmane Dembélé. He was born on the 15th of May, 1997, in the town of Vernon, in Normandy, northern France, a quiet place better known for its gardens than for producing footballers. His father had roots in Mali. His mother, Fatimata, came from a small Soninke community in Mauritania, part of the wider wave of West African families who had settled in provincial France, hoping for steadier lives than the ones they had left behind. That hope did not come easily. When Ousmane was still small, his father left the household, and Fatimata found herself raising 3 children largely on her own, cleaning houses and taking whatever shift work she could find to keep food on the table. She rarely complained about it later in life. She simply did what needed doing, evening after evening, year after year. Ousmane, the oldest of the 3, gravitated toward a battered football the way other children gravitate toward a favorite toy. It did not matter whether he was in a stairwell, a gravel courtyard, or the cramped kitchen of their apartment. If there was a ball nearby, he was moving it somehow. One evening, exhausted from her shift, Fatimata paused in the doorway and simply watched her son for a minute instead of calling him to dinner. He struck the ball with his left foot, then his right, then his left again, without any visible preference, without the small hesitation most children show before switching feet. She knew almost nothing about football tactics or transfer markets, but she recognized in that unremarkable kitchen that she was looking at something unusual. She did not have the football knowledge to be certain, so she turned to the one relative who did, her younger brother, Badou Sambagé, who had played the game seriously as a young man, though never at the professional level. She brought Ousmane to see him and asked him to watch the boy properly. Badou did, and within minutes his expression changed. He turned to his sister and told her plainly that the boy was not like other children with a ball at their feet, that whatever this was, it deserved to be taken seriously. From that day forward, Fatimata reorganized her family's life around her son's football, finding him a sport with a local club in Evreux, a nearby town with narrow streets and a strong immigrant community not unlike her own. It was there that Ousmane discovered futsal, the fast indoor game played on a hard court with a smaller, heavier ball, where there is no space to hide and no time to think twice. Futsal rewards footballers who can manipulate the ball in impossibly tight quarters, using both feet without a moment's hesitation, and it sharpens instincts that later translate directly onto a full-sized pitch. Many of the game's great dribblers, from Brazil to West Africa, credit exactly this kind of concrete court apprenticeship for the quick feet that later made them famous on grass. For a boy who was already comfortable striking the ball with either foot, those hard courts became something like a laboratory. Coaches at the club began speaking about him in a different tone than they used for the other children, and word of the ambidextrous kid from Évreux started reaching scouts well beyond the town's borders. By the age of 13, his reputation had traveled far enough to reach Stade Rennais, one of the most respected academies in French football. Leaving Évreux for Rennes meant leaving his mother's house behind, something that weighed heavily on a boy who had grown up so close to her. Fatimata, characteristically, did not hesitate. She told him simply to go and become whoever he was meant to become. He went. At Rennes, Ousmane was smaller and thinner than most of the other academy prospects, and for a short time, some of the older boys underestimated him because of it. That did not survive first contact with a football. He was so quick and so unpredictable in tight spaces that defenders genuinely could not read his next move, largely because he often did not decide it until the very last instant. Two nicknames followed him around the training ground during those years: a shortened version of his surname that stuck for the rest of his career, and the second one comparing him to a small, fast insect that was nearly impossible to catch once it got close to you. Away from the pitch, he was, by every account from that period, an unremarkable teenager who liked video games and stayed quiet in the academy dormitories, which only made the transformation that happened the moment a ball reached his feet more striking to the coaches watching him grow up. He made his professional debut for Rennes in 2015 at 18 years old, and by the end of that first senior season, he had scored a dozen goals and been named the league's best young player. Almost overnight, one of the most promising academies in the country had produced the most talked about teenager in French football, and the continent's bigger clubs took notice quickly. In the summer of 2016, Borussia Dortmund won the race for his signature. In Germany, still only 19, Dembélé exploded into full bloom. In a single season, he produced 10 goals and 21 assists across all competitions, numbers that would have been remarkable for a seasoned veteran, let alone a teenager adjusting to a new country and a new league. He had become, in the space of one campaign, one of the most exciting young attackers anywhere in Europe. Then, in the summer of 2017, FC Barcelona came calling with a very specific problem to solve. Their brightest attacking star, the Brazilian forward Neymar, had just completed the largest transfer in football history by leaving for Paris Saint-Germain, and Barcelona suddenly had an enormous hole in their forward line and an enormous pile of money to fill it. They wanted someone young, quick, and capable of thrilling the Camp Nou crowd the way Neymar once had. They chose Dembélé. The fee was reported at around 105 million euros, with performance-related add-ons pushing the total package toward 145 million, making him, at 20 years old, the second most expensive footballer in history, behind only the man he was effectively replacing. His unveiling at Camp Nou drew cameras from around the globe, and thousands of fans waving scarves. When the club handed him his new shirt, it carried the number 11, the very number Neymar had just vacated. For a boy from a modest apartment in Normandy, whose mother had spent years cleaning other people's houses, it was a dream that would have seemed absurd to imagine even a few years earlier. Fatimata traveled to Spain for the unveiling, and by most accounts held her son's face in her hands afterward and told him, quietly, not to forget who he was. That warning would prove more prophetic than either of them could have known. Dembélé was 20 years old, newly rich beyond anything his family had ever known, living in a foreign country, and surrounded by people reluctant to ever tell him no. The danger in that combination did not take long to surface. In September 2017, only weeks into his Barcelona career, he suffered a serious hamstring injury that sidelined him for months. He returned, then broke down again. And again. Over the 6 seasons that followed, Dembélé accumulated an extraordinary list of muscular injuries, missing what amounted to close to 2 full years of football when the absences were added together. The nicknames that had once described his speed on the pitch were replaced by crueler ones off it. Journalists and rival fans began calling him fragile, unserious, a symbol of wasted potential, a walking injury report rather than a football prodigy. The truth underneath the jokes was more complicated than laziness. Living away from his mother for the first time, sharing a large house with an uncle and a close friend, Dembélé settled into habits that did him no favours. Late nights, video games, fast food, irregular sleep. Barcelona hired him a personal chef to manage his diet, an arrangement that reportedly collapsed within months after Dembélé simply stopped following the plan. Coaches came and went, each trying a different approach and each finding the same pattern. Brilliant football in short bursts, followed by another muscle giving out. By the summer of 2023, Barcelona had run out of patience. The club needed the money his sale would bring in, and much of the football world had already filed him away as a cautionary tale about talent squandered by comfort. He was still only 26 years old, but the outside narrative around him had mostly calcified into failure. What almost nobody outside his inner circle knew that summer was that a phone call was coming that would completely rewrite the rest of his career. That call came from Luis Enrique, the Spanish coach who had managed Barcelona years earlier and had watched Dembélé's talent up close from the very beginning. Luis Enrique had just taken over at Paris Saint-Germain, and he remembered exactly what he had seen in that unpredictable young winger. His pitch was simple. Come home to France. Come to a place where you speak the language without translation. Come somewhere your mother can actually be near you, because I know what you are capable of, even if you have stopped believing it yourself. Dembélé listened. A few weeks later, he left Barcelona for Paris Saint-Germain in a deal worth roughly 50 million euros, less than half of what Barcelona had originally paid for him 6 years earlier. To much of the football press, that number alone read as confirmation of failure, a spectacular decline dressed up as a homecoming. Dembélé, by his own later admission, no longer cared much what the outside narrative said. He was going back to France. Vernon was suddenly a short drive from his new home in Paris, and he could see his mother on his days off, bring his own children to visit their grandmother, and rebuild something closer to an ordinary life. Luis Enrique set one condition from the very beginning. If Dembélé wanted to become one of the best players on the planet, he would have to start living like one. There was no shouting, no dramatic ultimatum. Instead, the coach simply treated him like any other professional with a job to do, expecting proper sleep, proper nutrition, and consistent effort in training, regardless of reputation or price tag. The coach had a broader football philosophy behind that approach too, one built around collective effort rather than a single superstar carrying the team alone. He had said many times he would rather build an attack out of several players contributing modestly than depend entirely on one man's brilliance, and he expected every member of that attack, Dembélé included, to earn his place through habits as much as through talent. When Dembélé was left out of the squad entirely for a Champions League match against Arsenal in October 2024, the message landed clearly. No name was bigger than the collective plan. Something in Dembélé shifted after that moment. He adjusted his sleep schedule, changed his diet, and began working closely with the club's medical staff on injury prevention in a way he had rarely done at Barcelona. He later reflected that the sheer number of muscle injuries during his Spanish years had forced him to rethink almost everything about how he prepared his body, and that the new routine, unglamorous as it was, had simply worked. The turning point in his role on the pitch arrived when Kylian Mbappé departed for Real Madrid, leaving a gap at the point of Paris Saint-Germain's attack. Rather than searching the transfer market for a replacement, Luis Enrique looked at the player already in his squad, who had spent his whole career using both feet interchangeably, reading a space instinctively, and appearing where defenders least expected him. He moved Dembélé into a false nine role, a position built not around holding the ball up with his back to goal, but around constant, intelligent movement designed to drag defenders out of position. Dembélé thrived there almost immediately. He scored hat-tricks in back-to-back matches that season, one against Stuttgart and another against Brest days later, finishing goals off either foot from angles that seemed to appear out of nowhere. By the end of that campaign, he had scored 35 goals across all competitions, a total that silenced nearly every remaining doubt about his professionalism. Paris Saint-Germain won the domestic league title that season, along with the French Cup, and marched all the way to the Champions League final for a second time in the club's history, this time in Munich on the 31st of May 2025 against Inter Milan. Dembélé started as part of a fluid front three alongside teenage forward Desiree Doué and Kavicha Kvaratskhelia. High in the stands sat his mother, Fatimata, the same woman who had once stopped mid-core in a small kitchen to watch her son switch feet without thinking about it. Paris Saint-Germain had never lifted the trophy before and had lost their only previous final appearance back in 2020. The match turned into one of the most one-sided finals the competition had ever produced. Achraf Hakimi opened scoring in the 12th minute from close range. 8 minutes later, a rapid Paris counter-attack found Dembélé wide on the left. He drove forward and floated a long ball across the pitch to Doué, who controlled it on his chest and finished from close range to make it 2-0. Doué added a second of his own in the 63rd minute. Kvaratskhelia scored a third for himself 10 minutes after that, and substitute Seni Mayulu completed the rout late on. The final score read 5-0, the largest winning margin in the history of the Champions League final. When the whistle blew, Dembélé did not immediately celebrate with his teammates. He looked up into the stands, found his mother among the crowd, and simply pointed at her. She pointed back. No words were needed between them. The whole exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it carried the weight of every tired evening she had spent cleaning other people's houses so that her son could chase a ball down a street in Normandy. By the close of that season, Dembélé had collected the league title, the Domestic Cup, and the Champions League, and had been named the competition's standout player of the campaign. That summer, the question circulating across European football was no longer whether he had wasted his talents, but whether he might actually win the sport's most prestigious individual honor. In September 2025, at a ceremony in Paris, the finest names in world football gathered to find out. Dembélé sat in the front row, visibly nervous, his mother beside him. A few seats away sat his father, largely absent from his life for many years, present that evening nonetheless. When his name was read aloud as the winner of the Ballon d'Or, Dembélé buried his face in his hands for a long moment before his mother pulled him into an embrace. In his acceptance remarks, he thanked his teammates and described Luis Enrique in terms usually reserved for family, before turning, finally, to his mother, thanking her for believing in him before anyone else on earth had reason to. Fatimata later said she intended to carry the trophy back to the small village in Mauritania where she herself had been raised, so that children there who had never seen a football trophy in their lives could look at it and believe something similar might one day be possible for them too. Then came the summer of 2026 and the World Cup. This part of the story is still being written even as it is told tonight, but one match already belongs permanently to the Dembélé legend. On the 26th of June 2026, at Gillette Stadium outside Boston, France closed out their group stage campaign against Norway, a match built beforehand as a duel between Kylian Mbappé and Norway's own prolific striker. Norway's coach, however, chose to rest several of his biggest names ahead of the knockout rounds, and it was Dembélé, not the anticipated headline act, who seized the night. In the 7th minute, he finished coolly with his right foot after a driving run. In the 20th minute, he struck again, curling a shot in with the same clinical calm. In the 32nd minute, he completed his hat-trick with a bending left-footed finish that dropped just under the crossbar. 3 goals scored inside 25 minutes, one of the fastest hat-tricks in the entire history of the World Cup. France won the match 4-1, secured top spot in their group, and Dembélé, now wearing the sport's most coveted individual prize on his resume, had written himself into World Cup history using exactly the gift his mother first noticed on that kitchen floor almost 3 decades earlier. Both feet equally dangerous, equally his. We have traveled a long way together tonight, friend. From a small apartment in Vernon, where the lights of an ordinary evening revealed something extraordinary, to a stadium outside Boston, where that same trait finally wrote itself into the record books. It would be simple to tell this story as one about talent triumphing over doubt, but that framing leaves out the years in between, the years when the story could easily have ended in failure rather than triumph. What actually changed Dembélé's career was not a sudden discovery of ability he already possessed in abundance. It was discipline, arriving late, delivered by a coach willing to treat him like a professional rather than a prodigy, and accepted by a young man finally ready to meet it halfway. Let me ask you something before we close tonight. Have you ever carried something valuable inside you for so long that you stopped noticing it yourself? The way Dembele nearly stopped believing in his own gift during those injury-filled years in Spain? Sometimes it takes someone else, a mother watching quietly from a doorway, a coach willing to say no to a superstar, to remind us what we were capable of all along. If you asked Fatemata today what she is proudest of, it is unlikely she would point to the golden trophy sitting somewhere in her son's home in Paris. She would more likely talk about a village in Mauritania where children who had never held a football trophy got to see one up close, carried there by a woman who once cleaned houses to keep her family fed. The gift she noticed on an ordinary evening, in an ordinary kitchen, eventually traveled further than either of them could have imagined, and it never once stopped being, at its core, about 2 feet moving together without hesitation. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, friend. Which part of Ousmane Dembélé's story stayed with you the longest? I would genuinely love to know. Take care of yourself, and until next time, rest well.